Imagine you're standing in a dense ancient forest, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and moss. Towering oak trees stretch toward the sky, their gnarled branches twisting like fingers pointing to something hidden. The wind moves through the leaves in a way that almost sounds like whispers, words, chants, and incantations beyond understanding. There's something about this place, something heavy, something alive. It's not just a forest, it's a temple, a meeting ground between this world and something older. For centuries, the people who walked these lands believed in forces beyond what could be seen or touched. They saw the divine in the rivers, the stones, the shifting of the seasons. And standing at the center of it all were the Druids, the keepers of wisdom, the interpreters of signs, the ones who spoke with the gods and the dead alike. They weren't kings, but their words could decide the fate of rulers. They weren't warriors, but they could shape the course of battles with a single command. Yet, despite their power, they left no written records, no great monuments to themselves. What we know of them comes from the words of outsiders, some who feared them, some who sought to erase them. But their presence lingers in the echoes of ancient stories, in the myths that refuse to fade, in the ruins of sacred places that still hold a quiet, unshakable sense of reverence. Who were they really? Priests, magicians, rebels against Rome? Their influence stretched across the Celtic world, and for a time, they were among the most powerful figures in Europe. And yet, they vanished. Their order was broken, their secrets scattered, their voices lost to time. But legends don't die so easily. Their wisdom, their mysteries, their stories, they still linger in the land itself, waiting for those who know how to listen. This is the story of the Druids, the magical figures of ancient Celtic culture. The Druids emerged from the heart of the ancient Celtic world, though their exact origins remain uncertain. Unlike the centralized religious orders of Egypt or Rome, the Druids did not leave behind written records, and what little we know of them comes from Roman and Greek sources, many of which were written by their enemies. The prevailing theory is that the Druids developed as the spiritual and intellectual elite of the Celtic tribes, who spread across Europe during the Late Bronze Age and into the Iron Age. As Celtic society grew in complexity, so too did the need for figures who could interpret the will of the gods, mediate disputes, and preserve the traditions of their people. Over time, these individuals, revered for their wisdom, feared for their knowledge, became what we now know as the Druids. There is speculation that their influence extends even further back, possibly to the builders of the Great Stone Circles and sacred sites scattered across the British Isles and beyond. While the construction of monuments like Stonehenge predates the Druids, it is possible that they inherited older traditions, continuing rituals in places already considered sacred by their ancestors. What set the Druids apart from other priestly classes of the ancient world was their reliance on oral tradition. They recorded nothing in writing, instead committing vast amounts of knowledge to memory, ensuring that only those who had undergone years of training could access the deepest mysteries of their order. This secrecy added to their aura of power, making them both respected and feared, not only among their own people, but also by foreign rulers like Julius Caesar, who saw them as a threat to Roman rule. Though the Druids are most famously associated with Ireland, Britain, and Gaul, their presence extended throughout Celtic lands, from the forests of Germany to the hills of Spain. They were not a centralized religious group, but a widespread caste that adapted to the needs of different tribes while maintaining a shared core of beliefs and practices. By the time of Rome's expansion into Celtic territories, the Druids had already existed for centuries, serving as the spiritual backbone of Celtic civilization. Their origins were deeply tied to a time when gods were believed to walk alongside mortals, and nature was not just a backdrop to human life, but something sacred, something alive. The Druids were more than just religious figures. They were the intellectual, legal, and spiritual pillars of Celtic society, occupying roles that stretched far beyond simple priesthood. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of Roman or Egyptian religious systems, the Druids operated as both advisors and arbiters, holding influence over warriors, chieftains, and even kings. Their power wasn't drawn from a throne or an army, but from knowledge of the gods, the laws of nature, the histories of their people, and the secrets of the otherworld. The Druids were the ultimate authorities in law, governance, and wisdom, often carrying more weight than the ruling chieftains themselves. When conflicts arose, whether between rival tribes or within a single community, the Druids served as judges, their rulings final and unquestionable. This was not merely because of their spiritual standing, but because they were the keepers of law, memorizing every ruling, tradition, and precedent passed down through generations. They also functioned as advisors to warriors and kings, interpreting omens before battle, performing rituals to secure divine favor, and offering counsel on matters of war and diplomacy. A Celtic chieftain who ignored the warnings of the Druids did so at great risk, for it was believed that the gods spoke through them. Beyond law and politics, the Druids were also healers and scholars. They possessed deep knowledge of the natural world, particularly the medicinal properties of plants, and they trained apprentices for years, passing down cures and remedies through oral tradition. Additionally, they were the educators of Celtic society, responsible for preserving and transmitting the histories, genealogies, poetry, and philosophies of their people. Perhaps the most feared role of the Druids was that of spiritual mediator. They were believed to have direct contact with the gods, the spirits of nature, and the forces of the otherworld. Their presence at major seasonal festivals and rituals ensured the balance between the mortal and divine realms was maintained. The Druids did not dress in extravagant garments, nor did they decorate themselves with unnecessary embellishments, yet everything they wore and carried had symbolic meaning. According to Roman accounts, Druids wore white robes during sacred ceremonies, representing purity, wisdom, and their role as intermediaries between mortals and the divine. However, in everyday life, they likely dressed in more practical attire similar to that of the noble class: tunics, cloaks, and belts made from wool or linen. Some Druids were believed to wear cloaks adorned with feathers or fur, signifying their connection to specific animals or spiritual forces. Feathers from birds like ravens or owls may have symbolized knowledge of the otherworld, while wolf pelts represented strength and insight. While most commonly associated with the Picts, the native peoples of Scotland, there are some accounts suggesting that certain Druids bore tattoos or ritual markings, possibly indicating rank, allegiance, or spiritual affiliation. A torque was a stiff circular metal neck ring, often made of gold or bronze. While typically associated with Celtic warriors and nobility, some Druids may have worn torques as a sign of status or spiritual power. The Druids were not defined by their clothing, but by the sacred objects they carried. These items were not mere symbols, but tools of their craft, each imbued with meaning and ritual significance. One of the most famous Druidic tools, the golden sickle, was used for harvesting sacred herbs, especially mistletoe, which was believed to hold divine properties. The metal itself was significant. Gold, associated with the sun and immortality, was considered the only material worthy of touching certain plants. Druids often carried wooden staffs or wands, usually crafted from sacred trees such as oak, yew, or ash. These were not simply walking aids, but symbols of authority and conduits for channeling spiritual energy. Some were believed to hold protective or healing properties. While the Druids did not record their teachings in writing, they may have used Ogham, a primitive Celtic script, for symbolic purposes. Ogham-inscribed sticks might have been used for divination or ritual markings. A deeply mystical symbol in Celtic belief, the cauldron represented knowledge, rebirth, and the connection to the otherworld. Some Druids used cauldrons in rituals, mixing sacred brews of herbs and mushrooms to induce visions. The most legendary of these was the Cauldron of the Dagda, which never ran empty and was said to bestow wisdom upon those who drank from it. Certain standing stones were considered centers of power, and some Druids may have carried small stones or crystals believed to enhance their abilities. While not weapons of war, some Druids carried ceremonial daggers, used in offerings to the gods. These blades were likely forged from bronze or iron and inscribed with sacred symbols. More than their attire or tools, What truly set the Druids apart was their presence. They carried themselves with an air of authority, their knowledge making them equal to, if not greater than, the rulers they served. A single Druid could silence a room with a mere gesture. They were not warriors, yet they commanded warriors. They were not kings, yet their word could decide the fate of kingdoms. Their power lay not in crowns or weapons, but in wisdom, and in the deep, unwavering belief that they spoke for forces far greater than any mortal ruler. The Druids did not build temples of stone, nor did they confine their worship to grand structures. Their sacred sites were woven into the natural world itself: forests, rivers, standing stones, and caves, places where the divine and mortal realms were believed to intertwine. These locations were not just settings for rituals. They were believed to be alive with energy, pulsing with the presence of gods, spirits, and forces beyond human understanding. Their ceremonies, steeped in secrecy and tradition, were designed to maintain harmony between the world of the living and the unseen. The rituals they performed were not mere superstition. They were acts of power, shaping the fate of their people and ensuring the balance between nature and the divine remained undisturbed. Forests were among the most important sacred spaces for the Druids, particularly oak groves. The oak was revered as the tree of life, a bridge between worlds, its deep roots reaching into the earth, while its towering branches stretched toward the heavens. The very word Druid is believed to come from the Proto-Celtic word deru, meaning oak, and wid, meaning knowledge. Combined, it means oak knower, or one with wisdom of the oaks. This name makes sense since certain trees were considered gateways to the other world, their spirits capable of granting knowledge, protection, or power to those who understood them. The oak tree represented strength, wisdom, and divine connection. The yew tree represented death, rebirth, and the cycle of existence. The ash tree represented power, transformation, and destiny. The rowan tree represented protection from dark forces, foresight, and prophecy. The hawthorn tree represented the portal to the otherworld, the guardian of fairy magic. It was within these sacred groves that Druids performed their most significant rites. These ceremonies often involved chanting, the lighting of fires, and the offering of gifts, herbs, food, or symbolic items to the spirits of the land. Though often associated with later cultures, many standing stones and stone circles are believed to have played a role in Druidic rituals. Sites like Stonehenge, Avebury, and Newgrange predate recorded Celtic history, but the Druids may have inherited these sacred places, continuing to use them for astronomical alignments, divination, and seasonal ceremonies. Some stone circles were arranged in ways that aligned with solar and lunar cycles, allowing the Druids to track the solstices, equinoxes, and celestial movements. The rising or setting sun at key times of the year marked the turning of seasons, guiding their agricultural and spiritual practices. Certain stones were said to possess energies of their own, absorbing and channeling power from the land. Some believed that standing within the ring of these stones allowed for visions, healing, or even communication with the gods. One of the most famous Druidic ceremonies recorded by Roman historians was the harvesting of mistletoe. This sacred plant, believed to hold divine properties, was gathered under strict conditions, most often from an oak tree, further amplifying its potency. The ritual was said to be performed under a full moon, when the plant's magical energy was strongest. A golden sickle was used to cut the mistletoe, ensuring it never touched the ground, as contact with the earth was thought to drain its power. It was then placed on a white cloth, a symbol of purity, before being distributed for use in potions, charms, and blessings. Mistletoe was considered a universal healer, capable of curing illnesses, neutralizing poisons, and even warding off evil spirits or curses. Some accounts suggest it was also used in fertility rites, ensuring abundance for both crops and people. The Celtic year revolved around 4 major festivals, each marking a crucial moment in the cycle of life, death, and renewal. The Druids played a central role in guiding their people through these transitions, ensuring that the proper rites were observed to maintain harmony with the natural and spiritual worlds. On October 31st to November 1st, there was Samhain, the festival of death and renewal, when the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest. Druids lit great bonfires to honor the spirits, performed divination rituals, and guided their people through a time of darkness, preparing them for winter's approach. On February 1st and 2nd, there was Imbolc, a time of purification and renewal, marking the first stirrings of spring. The Druids led blessings of livestock and fields, honoring Brigid, the goddess of fertility, poetry, and healing. On April 30th and May 1st, there was Beltane, the festival of fire and fertility, celebrating the power of life and growth. Druids oversaw sacred fire rituals, ensuring protection for their people and invoking blessings of abundance. And on August 1st and 2nd, there was Lughnasadh, the harvest festival, a time of gratitude and offerings to the gods. Druids conducted sacrificial ceremonies, honoring the land and ensuring prosperity for the coming year. Each of these festivals required rituals, chants, and sacrifices, whether of food, animals, or symbolic offerings, to maintain the natural balance. The failure to observe these traditions correctly was believed to bring misfortune, famine, or unrest. While the Romans exaggerated their descriptions of human sacrifice among the Druids, archaeological evidence suggests that offerings were indeed made to the gods. However, it is unclear whether these were voluntary rituals or punishments carried out in the name of justice. The blood of cattle, sheep, or birds was sometimes offered to the gods, particularly during festivals or times of crisis. The life force of these animals was believed to carry messages to the divine. One of the most debated aspects of Druidic ritual is the wicker man, a massive effigy made of woven branches, allegedly used for sacrificial burnings. Some Roman sources claim prisoners or criminals were placed inside and set aflame as offerings, but whether this was a common practice or Roman propaganda remains uncertain. Some human remains found in Celtic territories suggest that bodies were placed in sacred wells or bogs, possibly as ritual offerings to the spirits of water. These individuals may have been warriors, nobles, or even willing participants in ceremonies honoring the gods. While sacrifice, both animal and human, was practiced in many ancient cultures, the extent and purpose of such rites within Druidic traditions remain largely speculative. What is certain is that the Druids acted as the gatekeepers between life and death, ensuring that all offerings were made with the proper reverence and intent. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. The Druids were more than just religious figures. They were gatekeepers between worlds, walking the line between the mortal realm and the other world, a place of gods, spirits, and the souls of the dead. Unlike many cultures that saw the afterlife as distant or unreachable, the Celts believed that the other world was always close, just beyond the veil, touching their world in places of power and at certain times of the year. To the Druids, the other world was not a place of judgment or eternal rest, but a living realm, a parallel existence where divine forces, spirits, and ancestors dwelled. Through their rituals, visions, and knowledge, the Druids could peer beyond the veil, communicate with spirits, and guide others in matters of fate, death, and destiny. Unlike the Christian concept of heaven and hell, the Celtic otherworld was neither a paradise nor a place of punishment. It was described in various ways, sometimes as a land of eternal youth and beauty, other times as a shadowy realm where spirits lingered. Unlike mortal lands, time flowed differently in the otherworld. Some myths tell of mortals who ventured there, only to return and find that centuries had passed. Others tell of spirits lingering in the mortal world, unable to fully cross over, interacting with the living in dreams, omens, or strange encounters. The Druids acted as guides, knowing how to communicate with these forces, either through ritual, trance, or deep communion with the land. Druids were believed to speak with spirits, interpret their messages, and even summon them when needed. The Celts viewed death as a transition rather than an end, and the souls of the departed were thought to remain close to the world of the living, especially during Samhain. Some Druids were believed to enter trances, using herbs or rhythmic chanting to separate their spirits from their bodies, allowing them to walk the other world and bring back visions of the future. However, not all spirits were benevolent. Malevolent entities, lost souls, and vengeful ghosts also lurked within the other world, and the Druids were responsible for protecting their people from their influence. They used rituals, charms, and sacred symbols to banish unwanted spirits, ensuring that only those who meant no harm were allowed to linger. One of the most striking beliefs of the Celts was reincarnation, the idea that souls did not simply fade away but were reborn into new forms. Druids taught that death was merely a doorway, not an ending, and that the soul traveled from one life to the next, carrying wisdom from past experiences. Warriors who fell in battle were believed to return in another form, perhaps as another warrior, an animal, or even a druid. Some believe that great heroes and leaders were reborn into their own bloodlines, keeping the wisdom of their ancestors alive. Druids may have been able to recognize souls across lifetimes, guiding certain individuals along their spiritual path. This belief gave the Celts an almost fearless approach to death, as they did not see it as something to be dreaded, but as part of a never-ending cycle. It also meant that the Druids' wisdom was not just learned in one lifetime, but carried through many generations, passed from master to apprentice in a cycle that never truly ended. There were certain locations in the Celtic world where the veil between the mortal realm and the other world was thinner. Deep places in the earth were believed to be entrances to the realm of the dead, where spirits and gods dwelled. Some ancient burial mounds like Newgrange were thought to be built as portals to the other world. Certain megalithic structures were considered meeting points between realms, marking places where energy from the other world flowed into the mortal world. Water was seen as a boundary between worlds, and Druids often performed ceremonies near sacred springs or wells, offering gifts to the spirits that dwelled within. Ancient forests, particularly those dominated by oak trees, were believed to be dwelling places of gods and spirits, where Druids could hear the whispers of the divine. These sites were not to be disturbed lightly, as those who entered them without proper knowledge or reverence risked being lost between worlds. Though the other world was often described as beautiful and full of wonders, it was not without dangers. It was a realm of powerful beings, ancient forces, and laws beyond human comprehension. Take the East She, for example. While neither good nor evil, they were known for their tricks, riddles, and unpredictable nature. A druid might seek their wisdom, but dealing with them was always risky. One of the greatest dangers of traveling into the other world was that time moved differently. Many myths tell of people who spent a single night in the other world, only to return and find that hundreds of years had passed. Not all who entered the other world came back. Some were said to fall under the spell of its beauty, forgetting their mortal lives entirely. Others were taken by spirits, never to be seen again. Because of these dangers, only the most skilled druids dared to venture beyond the veil. They knew the paths, the rules, and the rituals that allowed them to return safely. To the Celts, the other world was not some distant, unreachable place. It was here, just beyond sight, woven into the land and the very air they breathed. And for those who knew how to listen, how to look beyond the ordinary, the whispers of the other world were never far away. The Druids were not just priests or scholars. They were figures of mystical power, deeply connected to the forces of nature, the spirit world, and the unseen energies that flowed through all things. To the Celts, their abilities were not magic in the sense of spells and sorcery, but rather a mastery of hidden knowledge, an understanding of how to harness the natural and supernatural forces that shape the world. While they wielded great influence, the Druids were not all-powerful. Their abilities had limits, bound by the laws of nature, the will of the gods, and the traditions they followed. The Druids were seers, capable of reading signs and omens to predict the future or determine the will of the gods. Their methods of divination varied, but some of the most common included observing nature. The flight of birds, the movement of clouds, the rustling of leaves in the wind, all could be signs from the divine, revealing hidden truths or warnings. Dreams and visions. Certain Druids entered trance-like states, either through fasting, meditation, or consuming sacred herbs, allowing them to receive visions of events yet to come. Sacrificial divination. Though controversial, some historical accounts describe Druids reading omens in the entrails of sacrificed animals, or even in human sacrifices, to predict outcomes of battles or determine the fates of kings. Their ability to foresee events made them invaluable to warlords and chieftains, who often sought their guidance before making major decisions. However, not all prophecies were clear, and many required careful interpretation. Druids were master healers, possessing deep knowledge of plants, herbs, and their medicinal properties. They were believed to be able to cure ailments, heal wounds, and even counteract poisons using their vast understanding of nature. Some of their most revered healing practices included sacred herbs. Certain plants like mistletoe, yarrow, mugwort, and rowan were thought to have mystical healing properties. Healing springs and wells. Many natural springs were considered sacred healing sites, and Druids often conducted water rituals to cleanse sickness and restore vitality. Energy healing. Some accounts suggest that Druids practiced a form of laying on of hands, channeling the natural energy of the earth to promote healing. Druidic healing was deeply tied to spiritual balance. They believed that illness could stem from disruptions in one's connection to nature, the ancestors, or the gods, and their cures often involved rituals as much as physical remedies. While it is unlikely that Druids literally transformed into animals, Celtic myths frequently describe Druids taking on the aspects of beasts, channeling their energy, seeing through their eyes, or even communicating with them. This ability was linked to their deep understanding of the sacred bond between humans and animals. In battle, warriors who fought under a Druid's blessing might be imbued with the strength of a bear, the cunning of a fox, or the endurance of a stag. The raven, the wolf, and the stag were especially sacred animals, often appearing in Druidic lore as guides or messengers from the gods. Whether these were literal transformations or symbolic ones, the Druids' connection to the animal world gave them a unique ability to move between the seen and unseen. The Druids were feared for their ability to call down blessings upon their allies, or curses upon their enemies. These were not simple spells, but powerful rituals and spoken words that could shift fate itself. Before battle, a Druid could bestow protection upon warriors, ensuring their weapons struck true and their enemies faltered. A Druid's spoken word was believed to hold immense power. If wronged, they could lay a guise, a sacred taboo or curse, upon someone, condemning them to misfortune, failure, or even death. One of the most feared Druidic abilities was the power of satire. A well-crafted poem of ridicule could destroy a ruler's reputation, making them unfit to rule in the eyes of their people. Some believed that a Druid's words alone could physically weaken a man, stripping him of strength or causing sickness. There are numerous accounts of Druids having the power to call storms, summon fog, or even bring fire and lightning from the sky. This ability was said to be especially potent in battle, where a well-timed storm could change the tide of war. While some of these tales may be exaggerations, the Druids certainly understood the natural world well enough to predict storms and use them to their advantage. For all their power, the Druids were not omnipotent. Their magic and wisdom had strict limitations, and there were forces they could not control. Unlike modern depictions of wizards, Druids could not simply bend the world to their will. Their power came from harmony with nature, meaning they had to work with existing forces rather than override them. Many Celtic legends suggest that iron was a weakness for magical beings, and some believe that Druids, like the Ishi, were repelled by iron weapons. This may have contributed to the ease with which the iron-wielding Romans conquered the Celts. Many of their powers relied on specific rituals, seasons, and lunar phases. A prophecy, for example, might only be possible under a full moon, or a blessing might require a certain herb gathered at dawn. There were limits even to Druidic knowledge. Some mysteries of the otherworld were not meant to be known and were even considered forbidden. A Druid who overstepped these limits risked madness or even death. Despite these limitations, the Druids were among the most powerful and influential figures in Celtic society. Their wisdom was respected, their magic feared, and their presence shaped the fate of kings and warriors alike. For centuries, the Druids were the intellectual, spiritual, and political backbone of the Celtic world. They advised kings, presided over sacred ceremonies, and maintained the vast oral traditions that connected their people to the past. But despite their influence, their power did not last forever. Their decline was not sudden, nor was it the result of a single event. Instead, it came in waves, driven by conquest, religious transformation, and the erosion of the old ways. By the time of the Roman expansion, the Druids faced a force unlike any they had encountered before, one that sought not only to conquer Celtic lands, but to erase their traditions entirely. When the Roman Empire began its invasion of Gaul, modern-day France in the 1st century BCE, the Druids were among the first to recognize the danger. Unlike Celtic warlords, who often saw battle as a series of skirmishes between rival tribes, the Druids understood that Rome was something far more organized, disciplined, and relentless. Julius Caesar, in his commentaries on the Gallic War, described the Druids as the intellectual leaders of the Celts, controlling religious life, education, and legal matters. He noted that they had great influence over warriors and kings, which made them a serious obstacle to Roman rule. Rome's strategy was clear: conquer the land, subjugate the people, and eliminate the Druids. In Gaul, the Romans systematically crushed the Celtic resistance, executing chieftains and dismantling the power structures that upheld Druidic influence. Temples were burned, sacred groves were desecrated, and those Druids who survived were forced to retreat into the wild. When the Romans invaded Britain under Emperor Claudius, they encountered stiff resistance from the tribes, many of whom fought under Druidic guidance. The Romans saw the Druids not just as priests, but as the organizers of rebellion. The most infamous example of this conflict was the massacre on the Isle of Anglesey in 60 AD. Anglesey was a stronghold of the Druids, a place where they trained, performed rituals, and served as spiritual leaders to the resistance against Rome. It was one of the last bastions of pure Druidic power in Britain. In 60 CE, the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus launched a full-scale attack on the island. His legions crossed the narrow waters and landed on the shores, where they were met with a terrifying sight. The Druids stood on the cliffs chanting incantations and raising their hands toward the sky. Their warriors fought with desperate fury, while Druidic priestesses ran among them, their hair wild, calling upon the gods to destroy the invaders. The Romans, shaken at first by the unearthly spectacle, quickly regained their composure and began slaughtering everyone on the island. According to Roman accounts, the sacred groves were burned, the Druids were hunted down, and the spiritual heart of the resistance was torn out. This was a catastrophic blow to the Druids of Britain. While some fled to remote regions of Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, their ability to openly shape Celtic society was permanently crippled. While Druidism was being destroyed in Britain and Gaul, it continued to thrive in Ireland. Since the Romans never fully conquered Ireland, the old ways persisted for centuries longer than on the continent. Druids remained advisors to kings, keepers of lore, and masters of sacred rites. However, as time went on, another force began to challenge them: Christianity. With the arrival of St. Patrick and other Christian missionaries in the 5th century, the Druids found themselves facing a new kind of opponent, one that did not come with swords and legions, but with faith and writing. The Irish kings gradually converted to Christianity, bringing their people with them. Many Druidic roles were absorbed into the Christian church. Poets and lore-keepers became monks, and sacred sites were turned into churches. Some Druids embraced the new faith, blending it with the old traditions, while others faded into folklore and legend. By the 7th century, Druidism had all but vanished as an official practice. But why did the Druids disappear? While the Romans and Christians played key roles in the decline of the Druids, their disappearance was not just about conquest or conversion. Several factors worked together to erase them from history. Since the Druids never wrote down their knowledge, their wisdom was lost when they died. Unlike the Romans and Christians, who recorded their beliefs and teachings in books, the Druids relied entirely on oral tradition. When the Druids themselves were gone, so was their accumulated knowledge. The Druids thrived in a tribal society, where chieftains and kings ruled small territories. As the Celts were conquered or converted, they became part of larger, centralized kingdoms, where monarchs looked to Christian monks and advisors instead of Druids. The Druids had no temples, but they had sacred groves, stone circles, and ritual centers. As these places were burned, cut down, or repurposed by the Romans and Christians, the spiritual heart of Druidism was lost. As Irish monks began writing down myths and histories, they often altered them to fit Christian beliefs. Over time, the Druids were rewritten as sorcerers, demons, or forgotten figures of the past, rather than the powerful leaders they had once been. While the organized class of Druids vanished, some traditions survived in folk practices, legends, and certain rural customs. Many Druidic storytellers and lore-keepers transitioned into bards and poets, which preserved myths, genealogies, and wisdom in poetic form. Certain rituals and beliefs rooted in Druidism persisted in Irish and Scottish folklore, including herbal healing, seasonal festivals, and spirit communication. Some legendary Druids like Cathbad, Mugruth, and Emergin lived on in Irish myth, remembered as powerful sorcerers and wise seers. However, as an institution and widespread practice, Druidism was gone.